When I was 18, I managed to land my first job at a Starbucks close to home. I can't even lie, I was raised in a very sheltered home for as long as I can remember. At 18, I had just recently graduated from a private school, and on top of that, I was focused on schooling. Relationships were something that I just didn't care for. When I started this job, it was a culture shock because all of a sudden, I was in the real world. I was listening to other people with vastly different personalities and perspectives, and it was overwhelming. I guess that was why when I met some of the coworkers, the red flags flew over my head. I just never acknowledged them. In short, it was all surrounding this one male coworker that these two girls both had their eyes on. They were a tad bit older than I was at the time, so around 21. Said male coworker, let's call him Jacob, knew that these two women were both trying to get to know him, and he loved it. He was eating the attention up. When the two girls would work separate shifts, he would flirt with each of them. Then, when they worked together, it was like he rotated his flirtation between the two. Watching from a distance, I didn't do much but shake my head at the stupidity of it all. I'd also try to avoid the madness, but that was just routine for me. Well, there was one thing that dear Jacob didn't tell either of the two girls, and that was that he also had a girlfriend who lived out of town. They found out when she showed up at his work to surprise him, and he looked like he had spotted a ghost. You would think that would deter the other two crushes, but no. Somehow it made them both try to get his attention even more. There was one day that things reached a level that made work more uncomfortable than ever. It started when one of the girls decided to get bold, and after watching Jacob flirt with her nemesis, she asked him out officially. When he responded, his words sent her into a fury. Without any emotion, he told her no, and that he wasn't interested. He was seeing someone. From the way he said it, and I guess looked at the other girl with weird googly eyes, the other girl snapped and flat out attacked her foe. Poor Jacob was caught in the middle and stuck trying to pry them off each other. Me, well, I wasn't going to even get involved, so I continued working the drive-thru. It only lasted a minute or two before the managers made it out and pulled them apart and fired them both on the spot. They then made one girl leave first before sending the other one to her car. Even though Jacob had definitely nagged this into becoming a thing, he wasn't punished. However, he got his own form of punishment as time passed. Things leveled off at work and it wasn't as hostile with the two girls gone. We hired a new guy and things seemed to be fine again. It wasn't until nearly 3 weeks after the incident that this poor guy seemed to be getting hounded from all angles. While I understand cheating is wrong and I 100% agreed that the girl from work was right to tell his girlfriend, she didn't stop there. Not at all. It started with Snapchats. She would send him messages relentlessly threatening to harm herself, and finally, he had to block her. When that failed, she called Starbucks. On one occasion, I answered the call. Not realizing that I wasn't one of the managers, she started to tell me how she saw him out smoking marijuana by her dumpsters and he was bringing drugs into the workplace. While I knew he liked women too much, I had never witnessed any type of drug activity. I pulled him aside and let him know what was going on. The managers also intercepted the calls. Slowly, the antics just got more deranged. She even drove past his house and took photographs. It was all sorts of nuts, but then it all just stopped one day. There was no warning or reason. It just went radio silent. Jacob was so on edge by then that he didn't care that it was silent. To him, it just meant that something big was coming and he was terrified. He said he felt it. I wasn't so sure. I figured she'd just moved on, but I was proven wrong within the next week. It was on a night that I was stuck working closing shift with Jacob. If I remember correctly, it was a Monday, and it was a ghost town after 7 that evening. As we were cleaning and stocking, I noticed he kept checking his phone and looked stressed. I didn't say anything about it. Finally, he cut it to silent and went on about the night. Then the store phone started ringing. I answered it and went through the spill, but all I heard was breathing. I knew right away who it was, so I hung up. I was ready to leave and wasn't going to let this girl ruin us walking away right at close. I wish I was joking when I said every time the phone would hang up, she would dial right back. It was constant. It got to the point where I called our general manager and explained the situation just to get permission to turn the phone off. It worked for the last remaining hours we were open. For a while, we thought she had left. We didn't spy her from inside the store and the calls were obviously not coming anymore. He checked his phone and the messages stopped too. I mentally patted myself on the back for surviving the insanity of the last couple of hours. At the end of the night, Jacob still looked nervous, and I offered to walk out with him. I have no idea why I offered to do this, especially since he was a grown man, and I was barely 5'3". I just didn't want to leave him, because I knew that if something happened, and I didn't try to help, then I would feel awful. Besides, I could just blame it on the fact that when we closed the store, we were technically meant to walk out together for safety. I spent some time gathering my things and letting him make sure everything was off before we both stepped out. We were both parked across the lot, so it wasn't terribly far. With the door officially locked behind us, we walked towards the cars. As we stood there, he politely thanked me for being patient, which was shocking since he had never really been outwardly nice to me. I went through the typical "it's no problem" routine before I unlocked the door to put my purse inside on the passenger seat. When I went to raise back up, the reflection on my car door took me by surprise. From out of nowhere, I saw someone rushing towards him. I saw her before the screeching started. Not only that, but she was holding a wooden bat. For a split second I froze before I managed to tell him to get out of the way. I had just put my purse in the car, so my cell phone was in there too. This girl was swinging this bat wildly as if she had no idea what her target was. Without much thought, I snatched open my passenger side door and crawled in. As I slid to the driver's side, I grabbed Jacob and snagged him. I tugged him inside, basically folding him inside the car. I didn't realize that if she was this upset and jealous, that me pulling him into the car probably wasn't the brightest idea. I locked us in and called 911. She stared right at my windshield, and everything else happened in slow motion. With the bat above her head, she brought it down right onto the hood of my car. Both of us screamed, and she proceeded to jump on my hood repeatedly. Thankfully, I kept the police on the line, and they weren't that far away since we were in town. They came squealing in with their sirens and saw this girl still on my car. She wouldn't get off it. Not only that, but she wouldn't let go of her weapon. The police had to confront her and ended up tasing her to get down and subdued. When they had her in the back of the patrol car, they found her car parked a few blocks away. Inside, they found a white bottle of powder that was said to be 100% lye used for household heavy-duty cleaning. We never found out if that was meant for Jacob, but I definitely believe it was. She was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Jacob resigned from Starbucks right after. From what rumors were, he moved when he realized she was going to get a plea deal, and with no offenses, she'd be free in no time. I should probably start this off by explaining that I'm allergic to a list of things as long as my arm. That includes dairy, shellfish, pineapple, coconuts, and even cinnamon. It was annoying, but as I got older, I started to get used to it. For the most part, as a young adult, it didn't cause too many problems. I was comfortable enough to explain the situation anywhere I went that I thought would be a danger of cross-contamination. Well, we had this Starbucks close to my house, and I used to stop there regularly to get a coffee before I went to work for the day. Since I was always headed somewhere, I never went inside. After so many trips, I kind of figured out the schedule, and the faces at the drive-thru were all familiar after a while. We even got on a first-name basis, which was why I enjoyed going there. It felt more personal. Things were going great until the start of October one year. I went there as usual and ordered just a black coffee. Pretty simple, hard to mess up. I got it and drank it on the drive to work. It tasted fine at first, but as I drank the last sip of it, it tasted bitter. Thinking it was just me, I threw the cup away and forgot about it. That was until 3 hours later when my stomach started cramping. I was at work, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. 1 minute I was okay, then I doubled over. I tried to fight through it, but work saw what was happening and told me to go home. I did, and after a few hours it subsided. Figuring it was just a bug, I moved on with my week. The next 2 days I skipped my daily coffee run just to give myself a break, and once more things were okay. I went back to Starbucks that Friday and ordered an oat milk latte. I gulped it down and things went fine the rest of the day. You see, the second coffee I got from there was fine, so I never imagined that it would be related. I went back to getting the coffee once the second one was fine. Then, one day, during a weekend trip to the coffee shop for a Bible study, I actually went in. Standing there with my friends, I looked around and all the faces who had become so familiar and landed on one face that I knew from outside of the store, and it was my boyfriend's ex-fiancée. We made eye contact, and I could have sworn that she smirked at me. I ignored it and ordered my drink, making sure to keep my eye on it. I didn't trust the girl because I knew the history of the relationship she had with my partner, and it wasn't good. Still, I kept my cool and got my drink before going and enjoying my social time. She never said anything to me that day, and I was praying that she grew up some and had moved on. I even continued to go by there and never had any issues because from what other people had told me, she only worked afternoons and weekends, which was not when I typically went. I only realized she hadn't changed at all about a month after I knew she worked there. Me and my boyfriend went there on a Saturday morning before we left to go hiking. He was driving and ordered our drinks from the speaker, and I even reminded him of oat milk. It is just out of habit, even though he 100% knows. We get up to the drive-thru and get the coffee. I even let him have the first sip to make sure it was oat milk, which it was. It was also nice to know that it wasn't his ex handing us our drinks. As we were driving, we sipped along in silence until it was gone. It had been at least 20 minutes since finishing the drink that I started to get a really strange feeling. I was sitting in the passenger seat, and I felt my skin getting super hot. It felt like my cheeks were on fire. Then came the nausea. I begged him to pull over to the side of the road, which he did. Before I could throw anything up, I felt my throat start to tighten. I panicked. I knew what was happening. I found the emergency EpiPen and ended up injecting myself, while my partner called an ambulance from the side of the road. We both knew that while the EpiPen was great, I would still need a doctor. The medics arrived and took me to a local hospital where my boyfriend met me. I ended up staying in the hospital until Sunday afternoon because even after the EpiPen, my blood pressure wouldn't stay stable enough for them to feel okay letting me leave. Needless to say, both of us were bummed about the missed hiking trip. However, my boyfriend was more upset due to the fact that I even ended up in the situation at all. He was upset enough to actually drive to Starbucks when I fell asleep in the room. He told a nurse to make sure I knew what he was doing if I woke up. Well, I didn't wake up until he walked in with a police officer and his face was the color of a lobster. I don't think I had ever seen him that mad. I was confused as to why the cop was there over a mistake, but I found out later it wasn't a mistake. From what my boyfriend told me, he went back and actually spoke to the general manager of the store. After explaining what situation had just occurred, he was horrified and apologized relentlessly and offered to do anything he could to fix it. That was when he asked the manager to review the tapes from the time we came through. Using the cups and the timestamps on the sticker, it was an easy task. He pulled it up on the computer, and sure enough, we saw a girl with her hair in a bun over at a blender. She was grinding something up. She reached over and grabbed the coffee, poured the substance into it, and slid it back into place, and then out the window it went to us. The manager didn't even know what to say. My boyfriend quickly told him that while he knew he had nothing to do with it, he was calling the authorities because he knew the girl who did it. The manager agreed, and an officer met him there. His ex had already left for the day, but the officer wanted to talk to me, which is how he ended up in the hospital. I told him that I had no idea what she put in it because I didn't taste anything strange. He asked if we had any issues with her, and I told him that I hadn't personally, but she made my boyfriend's life miserable. She would fake pregnancies, fake sickness, and even faked her dad beating her one time. I didn't put anything past her. Taking everything we told him, he went to her home and spoke with her. She denied it all at first, until he mentioned the security camera in the store, catching it all. Then she came up with the lame excuse that it was ice she was crushing, which didn't make sense because I ordered a hot drink. Her reasoning was she didn't want me to burn my mouth. When the officer threatened to arrest her right there, she finally spilled the beans to him. According to her, she ground up dried pineapple into a fine powder before pouring it into the coffee. She said that she didn't think it would be that bad, and if anything, it would just make me sick to my stomach. Had she known that it would cause my throat to close, she wouldn't have done it. The officer later told me that she was grinning when she spoke, and it was the strangest thing he'd seen. In the end, we pressed charges. When she was arrested, they put her on suicide watch because she was beating her head on the window of the car. The whole thing was just a big mess with her. In the courts, she claimed it was just a funny prank, and thankfully, the judge disagreed. Now me and that boyfriend are married, and we both have restraining orders against her because that was just too much. I'm a firm believer that everyone should work in customer service at least once in their life. My first experience working in that type of environment was at Starbucks. During my time there, I made wonderful friends that I've stayed in contact with, and we all remember one situation vividly enough that we crack jokes about it now. It started with a venti caramel macchiato with a double shot of espresso. This lady would always come into the store at least 3 times a week. She was a little bit strange, but outwardly there was nothing worrisome about her at a first glance. She had always been sweet to me, but one day, another girl who had just started that week made her drink. A venti caramel macchiato with a double shot. We all thought she was joking like people tend to do. She did have a jovial hint to her voice, so we laughed along. Well, I watched the girl make her drink and she did put a double shot in the cup. The cup was handed over and she gave a slight nod before she walked out of the door. We moved on to the next in line and continued turning out the orders. About 2 people passed when this woman came storming back into the store, her face the color of a beet. She didn't even bother with waiting in line again, and instead walked right up to the front of the line and cut in front of a gentleman in a business suit who was highly upset about it. Knowing my name, she wiggled her finger my way and demanded that I come over. When I did, I tried to have her calm down and move her out of the line to talk on the side, but she refused to move. She started saying that she wasn't moving until we made the drink right, and it was a simple job. She didn't get how the girl was dumb enough to mess it up. The poor girl was listening from the other side of the counter. I tried to explain to her that she did make it right, but I'd be happy to redo it if it made her happier. She declined. I offered a refund, but she declined. With both options declined, I had no idea what this woman expected me to do. However, she did continue to rant about the drink. By then, several people were staring at the scene playing out. The woman started slamming her hand down on the countertop and spittle was flying out of her mouth. The man in the suit ended up leaving because of the chaos. Still going, I told her I was going to get a manager and walked away. As I walked away, this woman walked around, let herself behind the counter, and beelined straight for the girl who made the drink. When one worker tried to stop her, she flung out a free hand and clawed him. My manager and I walked out of the back right about the time that the woman removed the lid from said coffee and dumped it on the girl. Thankfully, she was wearing a hat, and the coffee had time to cool during her tantrum. Still, she wasn't there for it, and both of the women then started to fight. We managed to separate them and call the police. When they arrived, they took her into custody, and she was banned from the store permanently. The girl was suspended, and at the end of it, decided not to come back. A few weeks passed, and things were going good until the calls started. I was called into the office one day after my shift, and when I sat down, my boss had this look on his face that said something was up. When I asked what was wrong, I was informed someone called Cooperate and told them I was doing IV drugs in the bathroom, and a customer saw me. I was so lost because I had never touched drugs, and surely they knew that. Still, I had to take a drug test to prove it. Crisis averted. Or so I thought. The calls did stop, but then this woman started appearing outside of the store. I never saw the car she was in, so I don't know how she got there. But she would stand outside across the parking lot and just stare at the doors. One day, the only reason she left was because a cop ordered her to. Still, she would come back. It got to the point that I hated going into the shift. It was as if she was out to ruin my life, even though I was just the one who spoke to her. I had several issues with notes being left on my car. She tried to add me on social media. She found my house phone number, all of it. I felt trapped wherever I went. Early one morning, I was stuck opening and was alone because my coworker was running late. I went through the usual routine of setting up and prepping the shift, oblivious to anything else. The sun wasn't even up yet, and I was struggling to wake up. Considering I rarely worked the shift, I was hoping the woman didn't show. I kept tabs on the clock while I was waiting on the other worker, and eventually, I had to open. A few cars came through the line, and I was starting to wake up. I still hadn't seen the woman, and I felt a weight lift figuring I would have a calm shift. When the chime dinged, and I took the next order, and it was a man. I made his drink and walked towards the window and opened it, getting ready to pass the drink over to him. As soon as he took the drink, I saw another hand shoot out from beside the truck and grabbed my arm. Before I could even react, they started pulling hard enough that I was standing on my tiptoes. The man was just as shocked, opening his door and trying to grab the person who was hanging onto me. He wrangled her away from my arm and I slammed the window and locked it. Then I ran over and locked all of the doors. I called the police and waited. The man was still outside trying to keep her away from the doors. She was acting like she was rabid. I could hear screaming from inside. My teammate showed up a few seconds before the officers and watched as the man started to lose his grip. Before things could get worse, they both had to hold the woman down. Officers arrived to a woman with two separate people, holding onto her arms and legs as if she was a tug-of-war rope. I left early that day. Officers told me later that she had a hunting knife in her pocket and was known to deal with mental illness issues. She had schizophrenia medication in her jacket that hadn't been touched. They warned me if she got out to be careful. It was a relief when she never came back around, though. I have no idea what happened to her, but I stayed employed there for another year without any issues from her. I'll consider it a blessing.